Greg? Okay, hi everyone.
Hi, everyone.
Good evening and welcome to the City of Pasco Council Workshop Meeting. The council thanks you for being part of our city government. At workshop meetings, the council discusses issues but no formal action is taken. The agenda packet is available on the City of Pasco's website at www.pasco-wa.gov/agenda. Please note that the city council meetings continue to be held remotely and may be accessed through GoToWebinar. This meeting is being also televised on live on Pasco TV, channel 191, on Spectrum Cable in Pasco and Richland, and also streamed on the city's Facebook page, website, and YouTube channel. This and previous council meeting video is available on the city's website. Through proclamation number 20-28, Governor Inslee extended a directive making temporary changes to Open Public Meetings Act. These virtual meetings will continue until the OPMA restrictions are lifted. And lastly, the public may submit their comments and/or questions for items not on the agenda by contacting the city manager or city clerk or using the feedback form on the city's website. So with the housekeeping out of the way, just have one more reminder that we are continuing to wear our masks and our disinfectants in the room and making sure we're clean. We need to continue to work even harder now, being that the weather is colder, and we're now gonna find that we might be congregating for those who congregate in facilities, and we would ask that everyone please use good hygiene and good social distancing measures to ensure that we keep our city positive rates as low as possible and continue to keep everybody safe in our community. So I appreciate that very much. So with that, we can go to a roll call, please.
Council members Alvarado,
Present.
Maloney,
Present.
Milne,
Present.
Roach,
Present.
Serrano,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Barajas,
Here.
and Mayor Martinez.
Here.
7 accounted for.
All right, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for attending. May you all please rise for the flag salute, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Thank you for that. Next, we'll move on to verbal reports from council members. Does anybody, any of the council have anything they'd like to report on and share with us here and in the community?
Yes, this is Councilmember Roach, and on Thursday was Hanford Communities Board meeting, but right after that was an even more important meeting, and I'm just opening my notes up because we met with the future Department of Ecology director. Her name is Laura Watson, and then a couple other folks from Department of Ecology as they vet their next hire for this location, who will work very closely with DOE. And so it was a really good meeting. They were inquiring for our input as to what are our priorities here in this area? What are, things that we might suggest? And so it was an opportunity to say what we are looking for in that person, because oftentimes it's somebody who is not from this area, who doesn't understand the complexities of Hanford, of DOE, doesn't understand the interconnectedness between the bi-counties, people that live here but work at Hanford. And so I would say overall it went well, and they heard us.
Thank you, Councilwoman Roach. Appreciate that. Anyone else? I guess Council Member Mr. Ruben Alvarado and I were interviewed last week, and for those of you who got the Sunday paper, saw us in the Tri-City Herald, and just wanted to share the importance of voting. And as we all know, next week is the election deadline, so want to encourage everybody to vote and do their part. And looking forward to maybe new beginnings or not, but just hope that everyone does their part, and we'll see what happens next week.
Mr. Mayor, there's one other thing I wanted to report on. Today was the day one of Tri-City Regional Chambers Diversity Summit. And so I had the opportunity to attend the morning sessions, which were on racial equity was the first one, and the second one was citizen law enforcement relations. And so Chief Roski was there. He did an excellent job as one of the panelists, and really appreciated the level of nuance and the depth of the conversation. It was really rich and it was not dualistic and polarizing the way that these conversations typically go in the media and newspapers, things like that. So I was happy to be there and happy to be a participant in that.
Thank you, Councilwoman Roach. All right, if there's no one else?
This is Councilmember Alvarado.
Yes, Councilmember Alvarado.
Thank you. I'll make mine brief. Last week, we had our Good Roads meeting. We meet every other month, and so we're looking to see what kind of priorities we want to advocate for from a transportation perspective. And then I also, I'm not sure if council's aware, I'm part of Association of Washington Cities. We have a 4-month equity work group to make some recommendations to Association of Washington Cities in ways that they could have initiatives to promote equity, perhaps at an organization level, but also how to facilitate these conversations at city levels, or how to be a resource for jurisdictions that are looking to further these efforts. And so I'm part of that work group, and we've had some trainings, and now we're next month we'll meet to come up with some recommendations for the organization. But just glad to represent Pasco in that group.
Thank you, Councilmember Alvarado. Okay. Thank you for that. Next on the agenda, we'll go to items for discussion for tonight. The first one we'll be discussing is the 2021 legislative priorities. And Mr. Zabel, do you want to kick that off?
Thank you, Mayor. And we do have this evening with us Brianna Murray and Holly Kochi from Gordon Thomas Honeywell, our government liaison folks that work with us in Olympia on our legislative agenda and our legislative issues. So the legislative agenda, as council's aware, we have a long session coming up. Starts January 11th. And in this session, this is where council will focus, or excuse me, legislature will focus primarily on their biennial budget and their capital budget. And so it's an opportunity, particularly in an odd year, long session for council to make a lot of progress along their goals. There's also a number of issues that are current, both state and nationally, that are going to impact this legislative session. And I think we're all have been kind of following along some of the national dialogue, and that is expected to trickle down into the legislature. And then certainly the legislative agenda that you have in front of you has also been shaped very much so by Gordon Thomas Honeywell professionals, and as well as other sources. We've had the benefit of a number of AWC updates, and then some of the professional agencies and associations that staff members may be involved with. Also, you'll note a lot of the items in the draft legislative agenda correlate with council goals, whether they're capital projects or policy issues. And so we kind of worked through that over the last several weeks, considering what options might be available, or what openings, I should maybe more accurately say, with the kind of session we're coming up on. And you have the draft legislative agenda before you to consider tonight. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brianna to kind of walk through, here's how we came up with what we did, here's what the thinking on it is, and we'll take council's input and make whatever adjustments we need to make and bring that back for your final consideration, probably at your next meeting.
Okay,
So with that, Brianna.
thank you. Hello, Brianna. Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Brianna Murray here, and you also have Holly Kochi on your screen. We're working together as a team. We did prepare a PowerPoint to go over what to expect this next session. The city manager just covered a great deal of that material, so we'll just go over it very briefly, and then we'll absolutely dive into the legislative priorities. If someone can advance the slide, it doesn't look like I have, and so go ahead and go on to the next slide. And so as I mentioned, the city manager covered much of this, but one element that he did not highlight is around the format of the upcoming session, which I think is very important as we're thinking about our legislative priorities. I'm going to let Holly kind of take it from there.
Yeah, thanks. Good to see you guys. Yes, so the format of the session will likely be virtual. However, there will be some in-person elements to the session. The legislature will need to meet in person in order to change some procedural rules for this new format. There is still some uncertainty how they will vote in a virtual format. For committee meetings, we've been seeing the legislature hold them virtually over the interim months, and so it'll probably be the same during the session. I'll touch on the next bullet. The Democrats are expected to maintain majority within the House of Representatives and the Senate. It is possible they may increase their majority in both chambers. Of course, we will know the outcome of this next week. And because it is a long legislative session and a budget year, like Dave had mentioned, the legislature will be spending a majority of their time on the development of the operating, capital, and transportation budgets. There are revenue shortfalls in 2 of those 3 budgets, which Brianna will cover more in depth here in a bit. In addition to focusing on budget development, they will also be considering several different policy proposals that are beginning to emerge and that we know will be hot topics for this session. One of those is police reform. Another is housing and rental assistance in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. And another would be racial equity. And we are really anticipating numerous bills that will be focused on COVID-19 response. That is everything from technical changes that they realize need to be altered to some of the more pressing issues, such as how much authority the governor should have during a pandemic. I will note that if the legislative session, is held virtually, which is definitely likely, the ability for the legislature to consider the number of bills that they have historically done will be a lot less. We are expecting to see much fewer bills introduced and even fewer that will be passed into law. So with that, I will give it to Brianna, and I think we can go to the next slide.
Yes, and I think if the legislature is going to be considering fewer bills, the emphasis will definitely be put on budgets at a greater level than usual. The main takeaway that I want you to have from this slide is that in both the operating and transportation budgets, there is a revenue shortfall. And in both of those arenas, particularly if we continue to see Democrats hold the majority as we're anticipating, we're expecting to see new revenue or tax proposals in both of those arenas. The other takeaway I want you to have from this is that the biggest funding opportunity for the city this upcoming session is within the capital budget. We're anticipating that capital budget to be $2.5 to $3 billion. They don't need to raise the tax revenue in order to fund that capital budget. It is the traditional capital budget that they fund each budget year. And many legislators are honing in on and focusing on that budget as a mechanism for restarting the economy, reinvesting in the economy, and helping the state recover from the pandemic. So I think with that background, we can transition to the draft legislative priorities that are before you. Just a little bit of guidance, and we can go on to the next slide, a little bit of guidance or thoughts to keep in mind as you're reviewing this draft. We're recommending that, given the limited capacity of a virtual legislative session, that you all remain hyper-focused in your legislative priorities. I always encourage the city to be focused in your legislative agenda, but it's even more so and even more important this next session. Encourage you to focus on your capital and transportation funding requests, and to focus on proposals that will take advantage of the current political environment. Before we dive into the draft priorities, I want to emphasize that this is your legislative agenda as mayor and council. Holly and I serve as your voice and your advocates in Olympia and in the legislative arena, but really it's only so meaningful in that you all embrace these priorities as your own as well. So with that, we can close out of the PowerPoint and bring up the legislative priorities document where you all can review those in your packet. But we'll transition to that draft document. And it starts off first with a $4 million capital funding request. I'm going to let Holly describe the request, but I want to highlight for you that this $4 million request is taking advantage of the most robust funding opportunity that we see available this next session. So Holly, will you describe the Martin Luther King Jr. Community Center?
Certainly. Yeah, so like Brianna had mentioned, the legislature has a desire to fund capital budget projects that spur economic development, but also focus on improving the quality of life for communities. So this project is a great example of what the legislature is looking to support, a community center that is in need for renovation. As I'm sure you all know, this building offers a gymnasium, classrooms, game area, homework center, and a fitness room, but is outdated and needs improvement. The city, like Brianna had said, is requesting $4 million within the capital budget in order to improve ADA accessibility, functionality as a community center, renovation of the gymnasium, demo of the classrooms, and replacement with a new center building integrated with the gymnasium.
We would advance this request with the 16th district legislators and then ask our 9th district legislators to serve in a supporting role to move this forward. The next item on the legislative priorities is also a capital funding request, but it is much smaller. It is a $200,000 request to complete a long-range plan for the processed water reuse facility improvements. So there's some improvements that are needed more immediately, but there is also a need to look at the long-range use of the facility and what would best serve the broader community. So we're requesting $200,000 in planning funds, and we would partner with the Center for Sustainability Initiative in order to complete that planning work. And they have committed to being joint advocates in advocating for this funding within the legislative environment. The next three items on the legislative priority list are identified transportation requests. I mentioned that the transportation budget was one of the three budgets that's facing a revenue shortfall. There are very robust conversations around the development of a transportation revenue package. These three requests would be ones that we advance within the context of that revenue package, meaning that if a revenue package does not pass, we will not secure funding for these projects. But if one does pass, then we will. I don't know that the prospects of a revenue package passing this year are extremely high, but I do know that the work done this year will feed into a revenue package if and when it does pass into law, whether it's later this year whether it's in 2021 or in 2022 or even later. So the first of these requests is a $3 million request to fund the overlay of State Route 395 and Oregon Avenue. This is an overlay that was previously scheduled to be completed that was delayed as WashDOT has run into a decline in revenue sources. The legislature is putting a particular emphasis on funding preservation, and given that this is an overlay and a preservation project, we think it would compete well. The next request is a $4 million request for a bike pedestrian crossing at Sylvester Street over State Route 395. Again, we're looking for projects that will compete well within the legislative environment. And there's a particularly strong emphasis in the development of a revenue package on multimodal investments. This particular area as well will connect a lower income neighborhood on the west side of the city with commercial businesses and services on the other side of the crossing. So we think that makes it a very competitive project. The third item is identifying safety improvements at State Route 12 at A Street and Tank Farm Road. These are two at-grade crossings at State Route 12 that present some immediate safety concerns. Right now, WashDOT has not identified specific improvements for these intersections. This would be planning funding to assist WashDOT in identifying what those improvements could be. We are currently working with WashDOT. We've had some discussion with them and are awaiting some feedback from them in identifying what the exact funding amount would be. We're anticipating that it would be less than the previous two requests. The next item on the legislative priorities list is a statement of support in favor of capital funding request that the Port of Pasco is planning to advance. So the city would be supporting the Port of Pasco in requesting $3.5 million to extend utilities, roads, and other key infrastructure into the Ryman Industrial Center. The city and the port have been working collaboratively in developing the vision for this project, and this item on the legislative priorities calls for that continued collaboration into the legislative arena. The next legislative priority item is acknowledging the robust conversation that the legislature will have on social and criminal justice reform and expressing a statement encouraging the state to enact reforms to the state's criminal justice system, but also directing them to look at the work that Pasco has already done. City of Pasco is taking some bold steps to reform policing locally, and that we would call on the state to look at some of the work you all have done locally as they move forward in enacting reforms at the state level. The next item is providing you all, the city of Pasco, with the authority to councilmanically impose a 1/10% sales tax increase to fund mental health services. Current law authorizes Franklin County to impose this 1/10% sales tax in order to fund mental health and chemical dependency services. And they have not utilized that authority. This would be a state law change that would say in counties that have not utilized their authority to impose this tax, that the city would instead get that authority. Pierce County has not utilized this tax, and there is a specific call out in state statute that allows cities within Pierce County to move forward in imposing the tax. So there is some precedent for this, but it is, at this point, the statute is narrowly drafted to only apply to Pierce County rather than any county that has not utilized the 1/10% tax increase. The other thing I'll note on this is that if the city of Pasco were to ask for this authority to impose this tax, there would be an expectation amongst legislators that you would utilize the authority. In other words, if they're going to go through all the trouble to change the state law to authorize you to have this capability to impose the 1/10% sales tax, then the expectation is that you would do your part in enacting it. The final item is defend local control. This is an item that has been on your legislative priorities for several years. We continue to see the legislature consider proposals that would remove your local control, and we continue to advocate in opposition to those proposals. I don't see that changing. Thus far, we've been fairly successful at prevailing and maintaining local control, and I think we'd be capable of doing that again this next session. In addition to your top legislative priorities that I've outlined here, there's a draft list of items to support and oppose. I want to highlight just a couple for your consideration. The first one is we've added a section on COVID-19 response, indicating that if additional federal funds become available to the state in response to COVID-19, whether that's a CARES 2 Act or a HEROES Act, or whatever name it may go by, we would ask that the state share a portion of that revenue with cities. The other item I'd like to highlight is under public safety. We've asked for funding and policies to address the opioid epidemic. That is a new addition to this list of support and oppose. And then otherwise, the items on this list have been updated and modified to reflect the current political climate or latest items that are largely carryover from previous year's efforts. So I will pause there to see if there are questions, thoughts, and feedback. Again, this is a draft legislative priorities document, and we're looking for your feedback on whether these items align with your priorities.
Thank you for that, Brianna. Council, would you like to make any comments?
This is Councilmember Maloney.
Yes, Mr. Maloney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Brianna, for the presentation, putting this together. Always a pleasure to work with you, and I hope you and your family are doing well. So my first question is, I saw that tactically you were recommending that we focus on 4 to 6 items, but I counted 9 on our top priority list. Given the virtual nature of this and the difficulty we're going to have, even having meaningful conversations with our legislators and being able to really advocate for this agenda, I feel like it's maybe a little on the long side. Given that, is there any sort of priority that you think in terms of opportunistically, there's a number of these that are very timely, really important, I think, to the city and to our constituents. But some of these may not be flying this year. So could you help me understand how we can prioritize this better?
Sure, yes. I'll just start by saying I'm very good at not following my own rules. I don't think this is too ambitious. That would be my recommendation, in large part because what's included in this document is some very well-crafted funding requests. So it's not as though you're putting together 4 to 6 different policy requests, and I do think there's a distinction there. In terms of area of opportunity, again, capital funding is going to be where the largest return on investment exists for the city to spend its time on, and that's where we're going to see the legislature able to allocate the most amount of funding is within that bucket. The social and criminal justice reform conversation is going to be happening regardless of whether it is on the city's legislative agenda or not. I think it is helpful for the city to have a position on it. If that's an item you'd prefer to have in the support opposes list, I think that would be equally as appropriate. I think it's up to you all as a council to decide what level of priority you want to put on that item. And probably same goes with the defend local control. That's been a very important issue to the city, but again, you could move that down to the support opposes list if preferred. The mental health sales tax is, I think if you're going to ask for that authority, it needs to be one of your top priorities. It is an ambitious request, but it does fit the political climate that we're anticipating this next session, so I think it would fare well. But it is a fairly specific request to your geographic area and your unique situation. So it would need to remain a priority issue if you want to keep it on.
Okay, I appreciate that. I appreciate the clarity of when we have well-crafted and narrow specific budget requests and projects, that it's easier to communicate that quickly and easily than say, a nuanced change to public facility district legislation within the RCWs. So I appreciate that. I guess what I would say is that I am very cautious about the idea of moving forward on on looking at increasing sales tax in this current climate. I think the need is strong, but I'm very hesitant, during COVID and immediately after, to be looking at asking for additional sales tax at this time, especially because we still are moving forward as a priority for the public facility district, and if that were to be put out to the people, that would be another 0.2 of 1% of sales tax. So I think I said this last year, I think I'm saying it again this year, I would prefer to see us push that item off a bit. I just don't think it's going to be a good environment for us to approach that. And if we get the authority, we're going to need to use it. And if we're going to use it, I'm not sure next year will be the right year to do that. So I guess that would be my comments. Otherwise, I look forward to helping advocate for our priorities in whatever form they take. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Maloney. I have a question, maybe to Mr. Radkai, concerning the increase in sales tax for the mental health sales tax. My question is, how does this fall in line with the potential of, or where we're at with the counties working to create that facility for the bi-county mental health issues? You remember, maybe Mr. Zabel? I don't know if that's something that was just, that we spoke of it at one time. I don't know where it's at. But if we were to pursue this mental health sales tax issue, would that have how would that sit in with what the counties are trying to do to create this facility for mental health?
Yeah, I don't think I can speak with a great amount of detail to that because there hasn't been much discussion on it, probably because the counties, the health district, and all of us have been preoccupied with another issue. So I don't know that a lot has occurred along those lines over the last 6 months. So, and I don't know, I'm not familiar with what funding mechanism the folks were looking at for funding that facility.
And my concern is, along with Councilmember Maloney, is, not too sure. We hear from Brianna that it might fit in with the environment in the next session, but on the other hand, we're still dealing with a lot of people struggling in COVID, and then we have this issue where we'll be obligated to act if it was to pass. So, I mean, there's a lot of things pushing against us. So, maybe it is something we can hold back to see where we're at with the counties creating a facility and not putting ourselves in a position to where, because I'm scared that Brianna's going to make it happen.
If it's on this list, I'm certainly going to advocate and try. That's what this list is it's your marching orders for me.
Yeah.
I will note that the statutory construction of this 1% of 1/10 mental health sales tax, the allowable uses are in operations and services, not in capital improvements.
Okay.
And so I don't know how that fits in with the local conversation you all are having, but you could not utilize these funds for capital construction.
Okay. Well, when I said it was meant for a compliment, by the way, Brianna.
On that particular proposal, it could be utilized, capital would come from someplace else, it could be utilized to operate that facility. So I don't, like I say, I don't want to speak for what the counties, had been talking about in that regard. So one suggestion in planting a seed, because I think the mental health issue is pretty important in some of what we're dealing with, and and through the fire and ambulance folks as well as our police officers, is maybe as an alternative, council consider under the pros or support and oppose section additional mental health funding from the state to support the community needs.
Okay.
Yeah, that is certainly an option that Dave has outlined. And I think is one that if you're not going to utilize the authority to increase the sales tax, that it wouldn't be logical that then what you would be asking is for the state to invest in more mental health programs in order to meet the community's growing needs. And that you'd like to see that as a state-funded service rather than a locally funded service.
Okay.
Well, to Dave's point about the fire and police, could we use this to increase our hotspotters program? That wouldn't be a capital improvement. That would be, essentially beefing up and employing more people in a program that already exists. And obviously, I don't want to put you on the spot, Brianna or Holly, because you probably don't have enough familiarity to say yes or no. But I mean, it sounds like this might be something, if we were to press forward, we could actually use the money to increase an existing program. Maybe I'm wrong there.
So I won't be able to speak to it in great detail, but there is a percentage of the funding you can use to fund current programs, but there is a requirement that you spend a certain percentage of it on new programs. They don't want you to utilize this revenue to just supplant all the existing programs that are currently in place. The concept of this tax, when it was originally enacted, was that it was enhanced services at the local level, not just a shifting of dollars, so to say. I don't know a ton about your local program. The funding can be used on behavioral health programs. So where you have an embedded mental health professional with a law enforcement officer, you can fund it in that way, as long as there's a mental health service being provided to the individual that they're contacting. It can't just be a strict response to a service or police call. It also needs to include some sort of offer for mental health services or connecting that individual with mental health services. It has to go a step beyond just a response to a 911 call. I hope that it probably partially answered your question, not fully.
No, that's enough that it kind of hits the nail on the head and speaks directly to our program and gives ideas of what we could do with the funding, at least in part. Thank you.
For the city in Pierce County that have utilized this authority, they've used some of it to fund a program that is combined with their law enforcement. They've also gone out and asked local service providers to respond to a notice to provide mental health services, and they've contracted out a lot of the funding.
This is Councilmember Alvarado. I think I'd just like to second the interest in seeing what we can do to perhaps enhance our current program, and if there's anything that our staff can do as well. There definitely is a need that we have in our community, like most cities, but one that we certainly want to be working on. And I think the Hotspotters program is definitely a very good program that has benefited our community very positively. So I'd love to be able to see how we can even enhance what we have already. I know that there's a lot of gaps in service, especially on the weekends, to that specific program. And so it'd be great to be able to really meet the needs better.
Thank you, Councilmember Alvarado. Any other comments? Go ahead,
Yes, thank you,
Councilwoman
Mayor.
Roach.
This is Councilmember Roach. Just wanted to say good evening to Brianna and Holly. Nice to see you guys again, and congratulations to Brianna on becoming a mother. I was really excited to see the priorities and at the top see the MLK Center, because this is a really important project, but also to see the SR12 one as well, because this is something that I've been, as a non-city council member, just as a resident and a planning commissioner, and then as a city council member, advocating for improvements of this area, because it is really a public safety and wellness component. So for the neighborhood that lives near to this access point to the highway. And what I remember and I recall of being there in Olympia last year was that, you and City Manager Dave Zabel have the technical and legislative jargon down pat, and there's no need for, city council member there except for to talk about the human component and the human element of it as to how it relates to residents and actual anecdotal improvement to the quality of life, infrastructure, and what it would do for residents of Pasco. And so my question to you or Holly, whoever can answer, is as we move to a virtual legislative process, will there be room for us council members to infuse that into this agenda? And if you know how so, can you please elaborate on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm doing a little bit of predicting the future, looking into a crystal ball. We don't know exactly how things are going to work, but I will share that throughout this interim, I have been doing several virtual meetings with legislators. They are accessible in a virtual format. We just meet not too different than how the council is meeting this evening. And in some ways, I can see your role and legislators as a whole becoming more accessible. We usually try and fit in all of your meetings to connect with legislators during a single week during the legislative session when you are in Olympia for the AWC conference. And we're competing with a lot of other city council members in town that day to get on calendars. With a virtual format, I can see where we may have the opportunity to meet more consistently throughout the entire legislative session rather than crammed into 1 week, and may be able to even meet with more legislators because the scheduling constraints won't be as severe. And you all could, I mean, there's many different ways that you can join those conversations to add in that human element. I also think that I've noticed legislators are more responsive to phone calls. And we may be, and you know, this is uncharted territory for all of us, including me. So we're going to be trying maybe some different lobbying strategies too of, hey, council members, I need you to pick up the phone and talk about this project to this person. And now is the right week in order to do that. So we're going to be looking at doing some different things along those lines. All I can say is stay tuned. Don't worry. I'm going to put you to work.
Thank you so much, and thanks for reassuring me in that way.
All right, thank you. So next week we'll come back with the priorities and approve them.
Well, I think we need a little bit of clarity on, there's some interest in enhanced mental health services by the city. And certainly we have the hotspotters, you have the embedded mental health professionals, and we have the mental health navigator through the fire department. You know, that is their sole job, is dealing with some of the clients that the department's working with in crisis and getting them into and directed towards the treatment that they need and the agencies that can help them. And so there's at least those 3 programs, and I'm sure there's more. So there's plenty of need, plenty of places to utilize additional mental health dollars. As Brianna, I think, has mentioned before, as it's currently structured, those dollars would go towards the counties. That's kind of how it's set up. They funnel through the counties. The 1/10 of 1% proposal would have been, as Brianna explained, those funds with a change in the state legislature or state law would be able to come directly to the city, but it would require an increase of 1/10 of 1%. Heard from at least 2 council members that are concerned about a sales tax increase, but we've also heard a lot of discussion about the desire and I think a recognized need that we need to put more resources toward those kind of services. So I think before we finalize this, we need a little bit of direction on, is our request for additional mental health funding at the local level? Or is it for mental health sales tax authority at the local level, meaning the city?
I have a question that I'd like to ask Brianna about it, and how these funds could be potentially used. From what I understand in our county, from our prosecutor, we have maybe not a formalized, but essentially he kind of does like a drug court. But what we don't have that I've seen in other counties is a mental health court, and it's a diversion program. And so is that a possibility to use these funds for a diversion program in our county department?
So the statute allows you to use the funding for a therapeutic court. I would, I think, have to do a little bit, yeah, it's not immediately coming up. I would have to do a little bit more research to understand the clear distinction between therapeutic court and mental health court. I could also see a challenge in that the county is structured to provide court services at that level and in that way. I would envision that if the city were to use some of this money for that you would have to somehow enter into some kind of a contract with the county, and they would need to be involved with the development of that program. So you would need to have a willing partner in the county to implement it, even if a mental health court is allowed under the definition of therapeutic court under the statute.
Are these sorts of diversion, and this question's for Dave, are these sorts of diversion court programs, are they able to be run at a municipal level?
The municipal court, I mean, I would defer to the city attorney on it, but I don't believe the municipal court would have the jurisdiction to do that. Eric, can you jump in?
Perhaps while Eric is being unmuted, it oftentimes would depend on the level of charge, I believe, and the diversion would be most helpful for charges that would be going before the county court system rather than the municipal court system. But definitely not my area of expertise. So,
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Yeah, so typically drug courts are done in Superior Court because of a lot of the requirements that have to be met with regard to not just the original charging decisions, but also it's a lot of the requirements to be able for the participants or defendants who participate in the program have to be able to be overseen through Superior Court typically. But I think there is also some creative ways they've done that at the limited court jurisdiction level. But I have to do a little bit of research to find a little more about it.
It's just interesting to me. I mean, most of the arrests that are probably made within the city limits are Pasco Police Department, and they're the ones that have embedded officers that are doing mental health. And so, I understand it's kind of one of those jurisdictional things that it goes to Superior Court, but I'm sure there's no lack of mental health programming that you might be able to provide examples of. And then I'd be interested in knowing what they are and go from there as to a discussion as to whether we pursue it in the legislative agenda.
Yeah, this is Councilmember Alvarado. I think I share the sentiments of the concerns of setting ourselves up to have to use this authority if we are, perhaps are not in a place to do that ourselves or not feeling 100%. But I think more than anything, I defer to staff to see if we have other sources of funding through grants or things of that nature that are allowing us to maintain levels or even increase our capacity. Then perhaps this may not be a needed avenue. But if it's something that we see that there's definitely a need and there's definitely that this would meet purposes, not just because of the opportune time of asking for requests, but because of the need, I'd be in favor of keeping this on.
Yeah, I would just respond really quick to give you a little bit of thought on that is, first, this is probably a once in a biennium opportunity to ask the question of the legislature. And if you ask and you are granted, you're going to have to use it. But I think there certainly are opportunities. One is, I think council's aware, we have some windows right now where some of our programs are not operational. For instance, the mental health professionals, embedded ones, only operate, I want to say, during the daytime and daytime and swing shifts. I don't think they're operating graveyard except on a regional Tri-Cities basis. Now they can, a mental health professional can be here pretty quickly, but from one of the other cities, but they're not in Pasco. Also, the funding for that program runs out in July of next year. So that's a grant. That was grant funded. So this, hotspotters, our navigator in the fire department, and there are, I'm sure, other things that we can be partnering with other agencies to provide mental health services. There's not any shortage of where you could spend the money to improve mental health services in Pasco. So there's a need, and this is a source, and there really is no other source. There are grants, as I said. There's one of our largest grants that we're taking advantage of right now runs out in July, and we have not heard whether or not there's going to be a replacement grant or some other program by which those services will be provided. And without them, that service probably isn't going to be able to continue as provided by Lords through a grant. So there's those things to consider. We also had some discussion, I think, about competing needs for sales tax money funded projects. We spent a lot of time in the last couple of years working through the legislature, the opportunity for the community to be able to vote on a major capital improvement project through our Pasco Facilities District. And then, of course, there's the timing. With the pandemic and hopefully a recovery afterwards. Once we're past the pandemic stage and inoculations and treatments are a little more prevalent than they are now, and this disease is knocked down. So we're kind of in a bit of a time of economic uncertainty. So there's reasons to do it and there's reasons not to do it. Right. So I think what Brianna and staff need is basically, given those things, we could go back and we could but we could identify plenty of opportunities for where these kind of dollars could be spent to benefit the community.
But you just would like better direction on
the
council's moving forward.
Is it something council's even interested in doing? Because if they're not, then we can just focus on an ask for additional mental health resources in general. It gets it on your agenda, and maybe 2 years from now, if things don't look better and we're not seeing better results with the current structure, council moves it up on their agenda and puts an emphasis for what the proposal on your draft is.
And that's understandable, and it is a tough decision because we know we would like to get as much help as we can to move forward with mental health issues that we desperately need here. However, we have an economic crisis. So council, I've heard at least 2 that is concerned about the economic crisis, 2 that want to move, seem to want to move forward. Anybody else? I guess I would vote for moving forward with this because this is something that even during COVID, it really is going to require a lot more of this due to the pandemic. So, I would be amenable to moving forward with this. Do you still stand where? Just any other thoughts, Councilmember Maloney?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So Mr. Alvarado brought up some excellent points about the simple fact that during our goal setting, we asked staff to work some miracles this year. And here is staff saying, here's one of the ways we can work those miracles that you've asked for. And I think that really helped me reframe it in my head a little bit of we're asking for improved services for the community, and we have to be willing to pay for those if need be. So I'm willing to continue having the conversation. I think hopefully we'll know more coming soon. What, 2 of the county commissioners are up for re-election. I'd prefer that of course, the county commission votes to take on the responsibility and actually use this authority. That'd be ideal. But we can continue to have a conversation if this is something our community needs. And so I'm interested, and I guess we can continue to have the conversation about what funding mechanisms and keep this on the table.
All right. Well, with that, Mr. Zabel, I think that's enough support there.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
This is I just wanted to chime in since it's hard to chime in sometimes. I kind of agree with Craig that I know initially when he talked about that right after a pandemic and economic crisis, it's maybe not the best time to raise taxes, but I do understand the need, and I'm definitely willing to hear about it. But at the moment, I just hate the thought of raising taxes when other people are struggling and getting, having the businesses closed down, and then we're talking about raising. So that's my comment on it at this moment.
Thank you, Councilmember Milne.
And this is Serrano. My question is whether or not we have to lead with this concept, or like city manager, one second. Sorry. Or as the city manager indicated, maybe we could kind of backdoor this into a more generalized discussion. As I was looking at our priorities, it's a page and a half long. Quite frankly, when I'm handed more than one page, I don't always look at more than the one page. I flip to the back, skim it. The idea of moving defend local control and social and criminal justice reform down to the support opposed might make sense. And then if we could truncate the mental health sales tax into an overarching mental health and backdoor in the sales tax component, maybe we could get this thing closer to one page. That's just some thoughts as far as, again, these people are pressed for times. They're going to have thousands of bills before them. They're going to have their committee duties. So the less we can put in front of them, I think the more bang for our buck we can get. That's just my take.
Thank you, Councilmember Serrano. Does that give you enough to get something for next week?
If council's in the majority on that approach, I think that gets us what we need.
Okay. Well,
it was great to present to you this evening and look forward to working with you this next session.
Brianna and Holly, thank you very much for your time and your efforts. I again just want to thank you guys for what you do, and I really appreciate the fact that when you guys are there, it's impacting, and I've seen you guys at work, and it's wonderful to see that we're getting every penny out of you guys that we can. So thank you very much for that.
Of course, our pleasure.
All right. Have a good night. Thank you, Holly.
Thank you.
So with that, thank you, Mr. Zabel. We're looking forward to see what comes before us for approval next week. Next on the agenda item, we have a potential amendments to the PMC for potentially dangerous animals. Mr. Ratguy, do you want to?
Actually, I'm going to take this one,
okay?
and
Go ahead.
Director Eck and I had a discussion earlier tonight. Okay, so as council's aware, we've had a long discussion about breed-specific language in the city's municipal code, particularly relating to pit bulls. And that discussion, we've been at council a couple of different times talking about that. Matter of fact, we made a minor amendment as late as November 25th of last year. So not just a year ago we were here. And that effort was really to bring our code up to some changes that had happened in the legislature early in the year. And right now we're very consistent with where the legislature is. in terms of what's allowed with regard to breed-specific language. The discussion back in last November invited more discussion and kind of rekindled the whole discussion on breed-specific language in our code. We had quite a bit of public input at that point in time. Went through the holiday seasons, came out of it, started implementing the budget, working on different items throughout the year, and then we wound up getting into COVID. So we didn't really have an opportunity to get back to this discussion about breed-specific language until recently. The item came up at council's retreat with the majority of the council wanting to bring this up and have a discussion and allow for some public input this year. Matter of fact, there was some discussion about putting that in the council goals, and I think we kind of came down on, or council kind of came down on, let's just bring it up and start talking about it. And so there's been a lot of thought on both sides of this particular issue. And let's go to the next slide, Zach. So what we really need tonight, we're not going to decide the issue tonight, and we need to put together a bit of a process for how we get public input and then whatever other input the council might want to have in considering this question, as it's been a somewhat perennial question. Yeah. So first of all, is a timing. One thing I would mention right now are our dogs that fall under this particular aspect of the Pasco Municipal Code are licensed out of the animal shelter. They're not licensed through our regular program. So we have quite a bit of flexibility as to when and how we control that licensing from a timing standpoint. When I initially had put the agenda report together, or worked with Director Adkine in the agenda report, one of the things I was thinking that council would be forced to try to make a decision by our last meeting in December, so we could beat the renewal deadline. But I think we have a little bit more flexibility than that. I think we'd be okay if council wasn't able to get to that until the beginning of the year. And I'm not suggesting necessarily a timeline. I'm just trying to give you a little bit of a sense of urgency. Where things go pretty fast, and we have budget to get to, and it seems like the December seems like it's a long ways away, but it's really only a few meetings away. And to put together a outreach so we can capture folks that may be interested in on this issue, members of the public. Certainly, I know we have a number of folks listening tonight that have pit bulls, and they may or may not be. I'm sure their interest is in getting this resolved as quickly as possible. There's other people that may have an interest in it that we haven't at this point in time been able to reach out to. So there's folks that are following it and folks that aren't. We want to get information out to the public so that they're aware of it. We need to schedule a public hearing. Certainly that could be done before the end of the night. And then there's probably some items, information that council may want research on and brought back. If you go online and you look at breed-specific language, you're going to find 1,000 websites why we need it, 1,000 websites why it's not necessary, and that it's really all about the animal and the environment the animal's in, and not the breed itself. So with that, I think we're just needing some direction from council on how quickly they may want to get this topic on the agenda in front of the public, and how and what kind of information you may want to have doing it. My suggestion is we'd probably need at least a couple weeks to get some outreach out there and let folks know the council's going to talk about it. So a hearing on it, we're probably talking about, say, the middle of November would be, if we wanted to set a hearing for public input, would be the soonest I would recommend it, just to make sure we're capturing everybody we can, rather than just folks that are specifically following the issue. That's my one recommendation on this, and with that, I would ask council just to provide staff some direction.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Zabel. Well, this is an opportunity for us, council, to request what is it that we need that would help us in forming a decision, and in addition to a public hearing, and it doesn't have to be a public hearing, does it?
Not a public hearing like a, like a required land use, but it just one that's open to the public, that public have an opportunity to come and, or, well, in this case, virtually attend and provide input or through writing.
Right. And the issues that, in my experience with those is that obviously you have your proponents that will provide you why in their experience, and then, of course, others that would think the opposite. But council, what would your any thoughts on what would be helpful to come to form a decision on this breed specific law that you guys would like to request?
This is Councilmember Roach, and I think just for the technical information desired under that bullet point, I know that former Mayor Watkins left me with a thick amount of technical information on the topic, in which there's credible sources. I don't know if you all have that, or most likely you do, but from the Humane Society of the United States about breed-specific legislation. I have been reading this book that maybe you all received too. I don't know. And so I think that those are good resources, and they've definitely informed my, my superficial knowledge about the topic of breed-specific legislation. And so I've appreciated actually reading them. And I know for a timing perspective, for me personally as Zara, if it gets pushed out to the beginning of 2021, not a big deal. But I know that what I've heard from our community members is that they care. They've been waiting. This is something that I presented on in December 2019 to City Council. And so to honor their time, I would say let's not make them wait till 2021. That doesn't really feel, that just feels a little bit like dragging our feet. So that's my 2 cents on the timing piece of it.
Thank you, Councilwoman Roach.
This is Ken.
Go ahead, Councilmember Milne.
Okay, thank you. I would agree with Councilwoman Zara Roach that I would like to see this also come before us sooner than later. And I don't have the information she has as far as that big packet, but I'd also like to know, do we have like a history? Has there ever been a pit bull attack in the city of Pasco? It'd be good to actually kind of know like numbers if, why this actually came about, or, that's what I would like to know is the history. But if there wasn't any attacks, I would, again, I like to take dog by dog, and I would like to see us have a chance to vote on it before the end of the year, if that was possible, and let each council member decide if this is going to be taken off or not.
Thank you, Councilmember Milne. So a frequency and severity of dog bites from different breeds, perhaps, Mr. Zabel or Mr. Redkite, that we could learn and get some statistics on. I would like to see what other cities, after dropping, after repealing their breed-specific laws, if there's been any statistics on the difference and what has happened afterwards. That would be really interesting if we can do some research and find out that information. Unfortunately, just in the just recent past here, and talking within a couple of days and a couple of weeks, there's been a couple of incidents, and it seems that I don't know that it's fair to the breed, but it just seems like the breed causes attention. And there was an issue in Moses Lake that some of us, or maybe all of us, were provided some information on, in which there was a fatality and somebody very seriously hurt. And then I just wanted to share tonight that And I'm looking at my phone here because I took a picture of the actual message that I got from a community website that said just Saturday, a neighbor down the street had their medium-sized dog attacked by 2 pit bulls in their backyard. Their pet unfortunately did not make it. Please be on the lookout for stray dogs and call animal control immediately. Pit bulls are normally not dangerous unless trained to be. So the message, obviously somebody was irresponsible in keeping their dogs where they were supposed to be, and then another owner's pet had to pay a price for that. And it just so happens to be, according to this person, there were pit bulls. So again, I would like to see if we could do a little research on some of the statistics of those cities that have dropped and repealed their policies, and then maybe some other, as Mr. Councilmember Milne suggested, maybe some statistics on the frequency and severity of the dog bites from the different breeds. That would be helpful. That would be my comment. Any other comments from council members that could help in getting this going?
I agree with the majority of the council members that we should move forward with this. Some of the history that I'm aware of is that previously, I'm talking years ago, there was a lot of dog fights in Pasco. That hasn't been the case. I don't think that's been the case recently or in recent years. And so I do believe there's some special cases here and there, but it shouldn't affect everyone that has taken care of training their pets and has good pets at home. So if we can just move forward with this and do something and not give it the, just take too long on it. So I'm in support of looking into this sooner rather than later.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Barajas. Opportunity for
This is
anybody else?
Councilmember Maloney.
Yes, Councilmember Maloney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I've spent basically, it's been come up off and on the entire time I've been on council. I've done a lot of personal research. Mr. Zabel, I know you and I have had a great deal of number of talks about this. Honestly, I don't really think that a public hearing is necessary for this. I think we've all seen the emails that are going to come in from that. We've heard from a lot of people in the community and surrounding community, and I'm not really sure what there is to be gained by setting up a special conversation with the community about this, to hear about this yet again. In terms of special and technical information, I think that's been well covered, and I would certainly like to just go ahead and move forward on this at this point and have and take this to a vote, definitely this year. And frankly, I might as well just get it done sooner rather than later. So that's what I support right now. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Councilmember Maloney.
This is Councilmember Alvarado.
Yes, Councilmember.
Yeah, I definitely agree with my colleagues here. I think the idea there is to be able to have a good, honest conversation among council. I think we have a good idea of where the public's at, both post and against, and definitely encourage to continue sending us information or letters of support or against this as well. But yeah, certainly being able to have the opportunity to, as council members, be able to have this honest conversation, I think would be really good. So perhaps bringing it to another workshop.
Okay. So Mr. Redkai or Mr. Zabel, is that enough? Maybe enough?
Yeah, no, I feel like, and I actually had that in my notes, that probably a workshop. We do have 5 meetings 5 Mondays in November. So we got a little bit of flexibility if we need a little extra time, but workshop followed by a regular meeting where council can make a decision.
Okay.
And at that one, they can decide whether or not they're going to take input from the public.
Okay. All right.
I don't put an additional meeting to cover the 5th Monday is necessary for this. If we have other agenda items, that's fine, but, I agree with the first half of Councilman Maloney's comment that we've had significant public inputs, continue to receive it. To have a special quote unquote hearing, I don't know that it's necessary at this point. So I certainly oppose adding another full day to the calendar.
Okay. Thank you, Councilmember Serrano. All right, with that, then we'll move forward and go to the next item on the agenda. And that would be the Tri-City Animal Shelter update. I know that Manager Zabel and Director Radkai have been busy going to other councils. Who wants to lead this discussion?
Well, I'll lead it off really quick. And as Mayor alluded to, just recently we visited with the city councils of Kennewick and Richland. Actually, we have different direction out of both. Director Radkai will, or not direction, but different opinions out of both. Director Radkai will walk through, but we do have a presentation that we shared with them. I think it's going to provide council some new information as well. I think the information is very positive compared to when we last talked about this. So Zach and his staff have done some great work with a couple of our consultants to try to narrow this project down and get the project cost closer to what the unofficial budget was back in 2015, 2016 timeframe. So with that, Zach.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Zabel and Mr. Mayor, members of council. Good evening, and yeah, we're back. It's our third week in a row, and here with the Pasco City Council to go through what we want to talk about this evening. So, since we last met in February on a shelter update, a lot has happened. During that meeting, we provided not only a recap of the history and the collective planning efforts of the shelter beginning back in 2009, but we also provided an analysis of the shelter plan that was came about from all that work that was introduced in 2019, and went through an estimated cost for that plan. We also provided the City Council with a report on current operations at the shelter, as well as the shelter population and numbers and things like that going through. So tonight we'll kind of go through just some of the current options that came about from our meetings in February, discussion with all three cities, as well as a preferred option for consideration, after which will be available for discussions and, questions and discussion from council. I will make note that we did retain the services of Strategic Construction Management, and Mr. David Robson and Ms. Kim Harvey are also on the line this evening, and we'll go through some of the analysis of the shelter costs and estimations for those. So back in February, through discussions with city leadership and all of the city councils of the Tri-Cities, so Pasco, Kennewick, and Richland, it was determined that the original and the most recent design that was completed and issued in 2019 would not be feasible for the collective budgets. The cost was considered fairly high, and there was many in the community that came out and felt that it was short of capacity. Based upon the collective direction of the three cities last winter, we took on a new approach to examine alternatives for a shelter, and this would be something that has more of a simple design, utilizing cost-effective materials and efficient layout. A shelter design that would have expansion capabilities and allow for the design to grow with the growing community. In addition to that, we wanted to explore the really a deep analysis of the costs for design and construction of a new facility. During the workshops last winter, there were also alternatives discussed among all the city councils, and these were, we brought up outside partnerships, namely with the two larger players for animal sheltering in the Tri-Cities, which is the Benton Franklin Humane Society and the Benton County Canine Shelter. So our current agreement for the three cities, just to get a little bit of historical background to paint a contextual picture for this evening. In 2016, an interlocal agreement for design and construction was entered into among the cities of Pasco, Kennewick, and Richland. The committee was formed to really determine the most fiscally responsible construction option or partnership option for the construction of a new shelter. This was based upon research and reports done and culminating in 2015 that outlined that the construction of a new shelter was the best option available. Through this interlocal agreement, City of Pasco was determined to be lead agency for the project, as the shelter was determined to be located continually in the City of Pasco, provide contract management services for design and future construction, be the main point of contact for the community, and also act as landowners, as the sites chosen were owned by the City of Pasco. And then a little bit of context on our current shelter. The facility is a handful of buildings, originally built in the 1950s, added onto in the 1970s. It's just over 8,600 square feet with a current capacity of 61 dogs and 88 cats. The current shelter facility houses animal control staff, shelter operations, and a host of volunteers. 16 total employees for the operations. That includes a director, animal control officers, customer service and kennel care, and the volunteers as well. So as we talked about earlier, some of the outside organizations were posed as potential partners for this effort. This came about from our meetings when we last winter. These were also looked into and researched in a 2015 study, as well as researched again this year. And what we looked at was contracts with the Humane Society, Benton Franklin Humane Society, and a contract with Benton County Canine Shelter. And what we saw was both require capital investment. With the Humane Society, this would be an addition onto their current facility, with a new facility or offices added and incorporated for enforcement. The same would be with the Benton County Canine Shelter. Benton County Canine Shelter is smaller than the Humane Society facility, so it would be significant capital expansion or new construction on that site or adjacent, in addition to providing room for animal control enforcement. Both options require a new interlocal agreement, not just for the cities themselves, but would also bring in additional partners here. Our current interlocal agreement with the other two cities is basically slated that we construct a new animal shelter for the Animal Control Authority. So we'd have to revise that agreement, the tenants therein, as well as bring in new partners with the agreement. In the case of the Humane Society, that would be their nonprofit board. In the case of Benton County, that would be the Benton County Commissioners. Both plans have an expanded timeline for construction and implementation. We expect, just on a generalized conceptual estimate, 2 to 3 years. This would be from RFP for design, retooling of our interlocal agreements, all the way through design, construction, and ribbon cutting. So there are some advantages with cooperating with an outside organization. Benton Franklin Humane Society is an established nonprofit. The Humane Society name carries with it familiarity. You know what they are, a fundraising aspect to it as well. They have a newer building in good condition. They do have some potential capacity to serve immediate need. Now, this is from a facility perspective, not necessarily from an operations and staffing perspective. And the property out there is zoned for use, zoned for the animal shelter use. Similar with the Benton County Canine Shelter. It is an established shelter. It's got smaller staff than the Humane Society, but they have an enforcement aspect to it. Their main driver is enforcement of dog and canine regulations in the unincorporated portions of Benton County. The Benton County Canine Shelter is a central location. It's off of the vicinity of Edison and Canal Drive in Kennewick, with great access to major roads and highways. We look at that as far as a customer presence for future adoptions, but also for enforcement. And a central location provides timely enforcement and response times for animal control officers. In 2015, there was ample accommodation for expansion in that area. Since that, the last 5 years, there's been some development, so there's only a couple of acres left in that area to develop for expansion or co-location of a larger facility. So some of the disadvantages that we look at here. With the Humane Society, I mean, expansion and partnerships costs are unknown. I mean, we've had some very preliminary discussions long ago. on this idea, but nothing concrete. We have not put in any study on what these would cost. It would result in a change to operating jurisdiction because the Humane Society and the Canine Shelter exist within the city of Kennewick. Kennewick would have to provide a staff member to sort of act as the operating jurisdiction and really lead the Animal Control Authority. The Humane Society is not a central location. It's in extreme East Kennewick. It is well known in the community, but from a response standpoint for animal control officers, if you had something on the western side of Pasco or North Richland, there would be a little bit more time in transport. Obviously, as we stated before, it requires an interlocal agreement renegotiation. It adds a new board to the Animal Control Authority. And according to the 2015 study, a portion of the site is located in the floodplain. I have not confirmed that for 2020 if there were any FEMA map, flood insurance rate map updates, but that could impact where expansion could occur on the property. And then there's additional staffing and operational costs. The Benton County with the Benton County Canine Shelter, there's still another high level of uncertainty on the partnership. I mean, and it's not saying that they would be bad partners or anything, but we just don't know what the costs or the scope of that would be at this time. It is canine only, so there are no cat facilities there. It is a smaller staff, and it's unincorporated Benton County, rural-based enforcement. It's a smaller facility. It's close to residential, and we look at siting an animal shelter where there could be potential dogs barking in outdoor runs. May not be the best neighbors for residential properties in the vicinity. It adds another board to the HOA. In this case, we'd be cooperating with the Benton County commissioners, and we're not saying that's necessarily a bad thing, but it's definitely another group to add to the ILA and negotiations for operations and capital expansion. Their staff's a lot smaller than the Humane Society, so would be the incorporation of our continual yearly operations, as well as hiring of additional staff in that area. So this comes to the other option that we have explored since we last met. In order to look into a revised new construction option, something that would be more cost effective, the committee, which led by Pasco, began two things in this regard. We initiated a geotechnical investigation on the current site to examine the feasibility for construction. We added a programmatic and structural concept design and through the firm Strategic Construction Management. They're on the line this evening and will be here to present some items as well. Part of exploring this option for a new concept really is to explore, could we use the current site and expansion capabilities on land already owned by the city of Pasco for the new shelter? Could this site accommodate a simpler, more cost-effective design while still providing room for expansion? In addition to that, would we still be able to retain outdoor campus areas where we could house kennels and outdoor dog runs, exercise areas? Some of the research that Mr. Zabel and I put in, putting some miles in Eastern Washington to look at other facilities. There's a new concept for outdoor feral cat colony space to keep the animals safe, but also provide some more of a neighborly presence for feral cats than being interspersed throughout the community. Would you want a potential adoption of an animal and be able to take them outside to have an introduction? In addition to just providing exercise to the animals as well. So would this site provide room for the outdoor campus? So as we stated, as part of the investigation, we undertook a geotech study on the site. This included multiple soil boring locations. And not to get into the engineering on this, but the main conclusions, the basic conclusions on this study was that while previously we had some assumed groundwater thoughts and concerns on this site, the site would actually be feasible for the construction of a 1 to 2 story building on the facility. With regard to utilities, water and sewer are in the vicinity of the sites. Obviously upgrades and any necessary reconveyances of water would certainly be examined and designed through the construction process. There's also some opportunities for utility expansion in that area that could not only benefit the site for the new shelter, but also neighboring and adjacent property owners. That could potentially be done with little direct financial impact to the shelter. So as we also looked at the conceptual design stage, strategic construction management called upon shelter directors and operators in different parts of Eastern Washington for assistance. And really, it was sort of you're a director now, you're director of operations. If you could design a shelter, what would it be? What are some of the things that you would like to see? And really, this resulted in a simpler, more cost-effective design that takes animal stress into account, separates dogs and cats sections, and allows for the efficient placement of staff, supply areas, utilities, and sanitization areas within the shelter. Additional sheltering concepts and design, structural air circulation, HVAC, were worked into the concept as well. In addition to this, and I do understand that it's kind of difficult when we have remote meetings like this to see the details of a concept plan such as this. But we are seeing the placement of kennels would be on the ends of the building. So if you can follow my cursor here, you'd have the dog area on the left, the cat area on the right, with the, we could call it the human areas, or the customer service, the offices, the staging areas for employees, sanitization and cleaning areas in the middle. Having the dogs and cats separate, but also having them on the exterior walls of the building would allow for expansion, which would allow the facility to grow with our growing community here in the Tri-Cities. So as we talk about growth and expanded capacity, this concept works this into the design from the beginning. And what we look at with this simpler, more cost-effective design is that from day one, it could accommodate up to 60 dogs and up to 90 cats. The original design that we brought forth in 2019 really had all-weather kennel facilities for 46 dogs that could be separated and expanded out with some outdoor runs for additional capacity, and then room for 59 cats. As we talked about, designing the building in a certain way could allow for room for expansion to grow with community need. And should this concept move forward, it would be the intent, once we actually get down to a true architecturally engineered design, to provide for room for quick and easy accommodations, for expansion, and potential ways where we could better address the cost for long-term capital needs. So if we see the need to expand the facility in the next 5 to 6 years, all three cities could have a more true estimate on those costs as they work into their capital improvement plans. Cost reductions that we've seen, that we found in the general estimates, which we'll begin talking about shortly, really were in the building materials used, the design of the internal structure, the interior concept design, and the placement of dog, cat, and human areas. There is the potential that this could be constructed in phases, and you could have a smaller new facility with potential renovation of a portion of the current facility to accommodate different programs and different needs in order to lessen that initial burden of capital cost for all three cities. And as I talked about previously in this slide, really this design could provide for the ease of future capital expansion, not only from a design and permitting standpoint, but also from a budgeting standpoint. So we have some initial cost estimations on this, and with a lot of flexibility built in, there's a lot of details and nuance that goes into this. And we do have David Robson from SCM here to speak to that. And I know he's on the line here. I may have to co-produce here, so if you give us a minute here. So David, you should be unmuted and able to take it away if you're there.
Great, I am. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, sir.
Great. Well, good evening, Mayor, council members, and City Manager Gavel. Been a long evening, and so I will do my very best to keep this short on how we establish these costs. In brief, this kind of master budget that we developed for the city of Pasco is very similar to what we developed for numerous projects throughout the Tri-Cities. And I can get into detail about that, but in specific, what a master budget is, it's all inclusive. So it includes architectural engineering fees, city fees, permit fees, special inspections, general conditions, and cost of construction. So when you look at this over the cost of construction for the square footage that we're building, it may look a little expensive as you first review the report. But understand we're also carrying 3 separate contingencies in there at this early stage of concept. Now, before I get into a lot of detail on budgeting, maybe we'll stop there for a moment because Zach, you did a very, very good job in walking them through. And after three presentations now, you've got it down, so well done. Let me stop and see if there's any questions that anyone has at this point in time regarding that concept or the approach.
I don't have a question. I just wanted to say that I really appreciate the design and the concept of having that separation between dogs, cats, and human area, as well as, thinking about that sort of, it looks like a dog run or the green space, just being next to where, considering it and factoring the distressed animal factor that is very much an issue with the animal shelters. It feels as if, in this design, I'm hearing the animal activists and their concerns for what they were looking for in a building and a new facility being brought to bear in the concept. So thank you for doing that.
Well, thank you for your comments. I'm sorry, please go ahead, Councilman.
This is Councilmember Alvarado. Yeah, no, I think perhaps more of a comment. Really the message, and I think Councilmember Roach, definitely put that into great words. But the words that were used when we toured the current facility, which really it's a shame on our city. But it was the words of nothing fancy, just functional. And I think that's really what we're accomplishing here. And I remember the earlier renderings that look really, really nice, but definitely served a lot less. And so I like that the resources are going to a more functional approach. And so kudos on that.
Thank you, very kind of you. So briefly, what I will touch on, that Councilmember Roach talked about, Kim Harvey can maybe touch a little bit on the research involved in putting together what you see in the concept and the separation of animals and why that was important. So Kim, if you have a moment, touch on that a little bit and talk about that, please.
We spent time with the Benton Franklin Humane Society. We spent time with the executive director as well of Scraps in Spokane County, and we called a few other shelters around the country and asked them for details on what works and what doesn't work in their facility. And after we spent a lot of time learning that and reading the very, very large American Shelter Veterinarians document that is really the guideline, because there are no codes for animal shelters like you have for so many other types of buildings. We put together the first concept and then took it back to several of them and said, okay, this is what we put together. What do you think? What's missing? And we worked with them and made changes based on their feedback for things like flow or where the intake area takes place, or where the crate washing locations are, because there are some very nuanced things that they know from operating facilities that you don't get from reading the guidelines, or just even having a conversation with them. It's something that jogs their mind when they actually look at a plan. So we did spend that time with them to learn what those pieces are and try to include that as we developed this.
Thank you, Kim. So briefly, in regards to the overall design, Zach showed you that quickly. It has been engineered, the concept has been engineered that you can put together opportunities for phasing and or alternates in the bid process, depending on what delivery model you like to proceed with. And so you could use some of the facilities you currently have for court holds, and then we could also use it for maybe some of the larger dogs in some areas, and construct in these legs, so to speak, alternate bid opportunities, giving the cities the opportunity to afford what they can afford and plan for the future. And that's part of what we worked very hard to put together in this concept, working with City Manager Isabel and certainly with Zach. So we're quite proud of the concept. It's very simple. The structure is very complex in its use regarding some of the trenches, epoxies, air conditioning, HVAC systems. But I won't get into all of that tonight unless there's specific questions about it. So Zach, if there's something else, we can go to the next slide and we'll answer questions.
I do have a question. This is Councilmember Alvarado again. In the change of design from previous iterations or previous concepts, it seems like obviously this is a lot less expensive materials and things like that. Is there any kind of impact on the age and how well this building would age? I'd hate for future councils to be having the same thought that we have currently of the current building, or even just how well we would be able to make updates to this building.
You know, that's a great question, Councilman Alvarado. And so what we've done is we have two alternates to look at. And one was a metal building structure. We were asked to consider metal building. And the other alternate was masonry. And they're so close in price that we really would recommend the masonry build. So you would have masonry walls, masonry interior walls up to some level of elevation, structural steel truss systems. In short, I think with the epoxy systems on walls and flooring, the epoxy would be up to some elevation on the walls, maybe 3 foot, 4 foot. But you would kind of engineer a building that would provide, with maintenance, a very long-term building for the shelter. You certainly wouldn't run up against some of the issues you're currently dealing with in regards to the structures you currently have.
Well,
that's your question, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
I guess I'll just have a quick one. One of the big issues with the current facility we have was the ergonomics. Did that take a big factor in the design, is to ensure that the ergonomics for the people working with the animals, was that taken into consideration?
That's a great question, Councilman, and I'll let Kim talk about that a little bit in regards to flow, and she can address some of the work that she did working with other experts in the industry.
We discussed a lot of different pieces. If the dog area is a good example, you'll see that there's a fenced exterior meet and greet area, the big green area on your picture that you can see. What you don't see, because it's just a conceptual floor plan, is the multiple fenced areas that we envision for external runs, so that dogs can be taken out and given time outside in safe areas. And that also helps facilitate cleaning of the areas as well. We also learned as we went through this process that cleaning is a challenge right now in the current facility. So what we looked at is, how do you design this in a way that you've got kennels that are accessible from both sides that can be sprayed down. So we're envisioning hoses in each of the rooms that can stretch and make cleaning very simple. In addition to that, trench drains, so everything just washes down and out. As well as an epoxy on the floors, the walls, to make sure that as you're doing that cleaning, you're not degrading the concrete on top of it. You're degrading the epoxy that at some point in time will need to be replaced, but you're keeping that structure intact. And also looking at things like having a separate HVAC unit in each one of the rooms to maximize airflow as well as minimize disease transfer. You'll notice that in the cat areas, we learned that cat colonies can be better suited for cats than just cat kennels. So there's a mix, because you do need both. There are reasons for both. And that also helps with staff as well, because you have fewer kennels to clean versus a large open room. And so we did look at those types of things. And we also sat down with those shelter executive directors and talked about the flow. As the animals come in, how do you need to bring them in? Where does that need to go? Where do the crates need to be washed? How does that process work so that you're making the right stops along the way? Did that answer your question?
Yes, that helps. Thank you.
Very good. Well, unless we have some other questions specific to the project, we don't have much else to present, Zach. So please let us know if there are any other questions or how else you'd like to proceed.
All right, thank you, Mr. Robinson. We'll move through with some of the, as we talked about, advantages and disadvantages of partnering with outside agencies. Really, we see a host of advantages with this conceptual design program. First off, quickest really for implementation. We already have a concept design and a program design, so really it's just about getting the architecture and engineering on paper, getting a permit-ready, construction-ready documents put into place. This offers the greatest control on costs. It's the ACA, it's the Animal Control Authority, it's Pasco, Kennewick, and Richland. And we wouldn't bring in a new partnership or a new board or another agency in on this. So really, it would be the concurrence of a well-established agency that would move forward, have the greatest control on those costs. The animal shelter is a known location of the community. I mean, it's fairly central. This would basically be putting a new animal shelter in the backyard of the current facility. It provides great access for volunteers to exercise the dogs on our trail system. You're not next to residential areas, so you don't have a lot of compatibility issues down there as well, and provides some good outdoor space for the animals as well. This also provides for future growth and expansion. So there's not only room on the land on the campus for future growth and expansion, but also the concept design provides for that ease of design and budgeting for the future. And then back to the outdoor space. I mean, there's outdoor space to put yards, exercise areas, activity areas, that sort of thing in that area. And Pasco owns the site already, so we wouldn't be negotiating with a landowner for a land purchase. Or another concept we looked at earlier this year was finding an old core and shell building, an old industrial commercial building to really reincorporate the shelter in there. So really, we wouldn't have those upfront costs, the upfront capital to sink in on a property purchase at this time. And then it provides co-location with enforcement. And once again, the central location along A Street provides the ease of enforcement to get to all three cities to conduct any animal control that they would need to do. So obviously, this is the preferred option from the operating jurisdiction, which is the city of Pasco. Provides the most control, the greatest flexibility. It's certainly the quickest option from design all the way to ribbon cutting. It accommodates future growth. It's a very simple and functional design. And yes, there is the potential for reuse or co-use with the current facility, certainly after updates are provided within that building, which could certainly provide some flexibility on those initial investments for all three cities. And staff is ready to get to work on this option. And as City Manager Zabel has mentioned earlier, we did, this is week 3 of this presentation. So we were with the Kennewick City Council on October 13th and the Richland City Council last week on October 20th. We received some good head nods that you could see over Zoom meeting at Kennewick City Council. Some general concurrence on the concept of constructing the new shelter on the current site. Last week, Richland City Council expressed concern over the construction cost, method of construction, and also asked to look at the potential for the design build process instead of design bid build, which we're doing, which is a concept that the city of Richland has incorporated for a couple of their public buildings. Also to try to find further discounts to the price per square foot, and more formally explore a potential partnership with Benton County at the K-9 shelter as well. From that conversation, we didn't receive any commitments either for or against the shelter, but they were also time limited as well. So if there was any other discussion, we would have to find out. So really with that, I mean, that's our update on the shelter and the process here. Mr. Zabel and I are here for any questions of council. David and Kim are still on the line as well if there's any other questions that have come up. So I turn it back over to you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Radkai, for that presentation. And what was your take? Are they in full agreement? Are they ready to go?
The city of Richland clearly wasn't. I think there's two things, two specific things that they'd asked us to do. One was to evaluate the design build process, and so we've yet to have the opportunity to sit down. We wanted to get through this presentation. We're going to sit down with Mr. Robeson and staff here, as well as some consultation with Richland staff, who actually has done a couple. Matter of fact, they're in the process of doing 2 design build processes right now, but they're City Hall and 2 of their fire stations, and it's a provided for in state statute, but there is a process you have to go through, and you have to be approved by the state to do it. Richland's indicated that they're, from a staffing perspective, they're losing one of their staff that's been very much involved in design build, and so they just don't have the capacity to act as our agent on that. And so the city of Pasco would have to find a way to make that happen, and I think that can happen. I think it's a challenge we're more than willing to take a look at, and so we're going to go through that process, determine what that's going to take, and whether or not the effort is worth the savings. And then secondly, we need to take another look at the Benton County option at their request. There's as Director Rekai mentioned, there's some disadvantages. I mean, you're involving in another government that would be basically and switching over administrative authority to that government. So the 3 cities would actually contract with Benton County, or Benton County would join the ACA and be the administrative agency. So those would be the 2 options, I think, associated with that. So that in itself adds a lot of time. I mean, you're asking an agency to go from basically rural dog control, no real dealings with cats, which we have in all 3 of our cities have. You know, that's a pretty robust portion of the business, and so there's be a lot of discussion as to getting them up to that model and whether or not they'd even want to do it. Plus, we need to build a facility there as well. And like us, and unlike the Humane Society, they would be required to build utilizing prevailing wage laws and so forth as well. So there's no real savings on the building with them. I think there's potential of some savings with bringing a new partner in, but their book of business right now is so limited, and they don't address cats, and their facility is very small. I don't know that the economy of scale would be worth the squeeze, you know. Mm-hmm. So we are more than happy to go talk to them, though, and look at what that would result in terms of a business model, and then report back to the councils, probably in writing rather than go through a 3-week process of meetings, just to expedite things, because we're a long ways into this project without a decision in a long time.
Right. So. Okay, well, thank you for that report. Council, any comments?
This is Councilmember Alvarado.
Councilman Alvarado, go ahead.
I had a question. What happens in, let's say we want to move forward with a specific option and one of the jurisdictions says, well, we don't want to do that. What happens then? Do we, move forward and make a smaller facility that serves 2 cities, or how would you see something like this panning out if, say, it wasn't favorable to one of the?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. That's a good question. I've been pondering it a little bit myself. Hadn't had a chance to discuss it with the city attorney. We do have a valid interlocal agreement that would require that does foresee a new building being constructed, and it lays out not only how the costs would be shared in that building, but also how that new building would impact future operational cost allocations. So it's pretty specific, and it contemplated. And for those council members that weren't here at the time or haven't heard a subsequent update on this, where we've talked price. I think the construction only cost price that was in people's mind at that time, it was about $4.8 million, which when you add the soft costs for engineering, architecture, and financing and some of those things, we're about in the ballpark of that right now. And I mentioned that at the beginning of the session. So there really shouldn't be any surprises or any sticker shock. That's kind of what was agreed to up front. And I don't know how enforceable that ILA is. I think that's something the city attorney would have to look at. But there is a process by which any one of the members of the interlocal agreement can provide notice and leave. So theoretically, I assume that would pretty much take your financial obligation for the building with you.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, I really do hope that we are able to come to an agreement sooner than later through the three cities. I very much appreciate the work that's gone into this, and but I'd hate to kick this down the bucket because we want to explore partnerships that are not ready to go at the speed that we are hoping for, which we're really hoping to have to move forward with this the sooner the better. And so anyway, that would be my as a council member for the city of Pasco. That's what I would hope, and that's what I would advocate for as much as possible.
Thank you, Councilmember Alvarado. Anyone else?
This is Councilmember Roach, and I have a few things I just want to say about this. First, I guess, question for Mr. Zabel is that do we as council members have the freedom to call up our fellow City of Richland council members and have a conversation with them about this?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question because it's really kind of evolved into the political realm. It's really not a staff to another city council. We provided them information, and their staff has provided them information, and I think it's certainly appropriate for elected officials from other cities to discuss the issue with one another.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I have a couple contacts there, so I want to, just flesh it out and understand what it is beyond just cost. But I think my other thinking would be that, as I go to Richland frequently, I see plenty of those campaign signs in people's yards that say nothing fancy, just functional in Richland. So we know that there's support there, and we know who our, as council members, we know who our activists are, and this is an opportunity to just work with them and, reach back out to say, hey, we need your support in you contacting your own city council and letting them know that you care about upholding this interlocal agreement. So there's that. And then, not to make the situation any easier at all, I'm going to throw this last thing out here, which is when I went to go visit the pet shelter last year, I believe it was either December or January, and Julie Webb gave me the tour. And so she was discussing, and this is about the concept, the design. She was discussing the difficulty in the current shelter and taking dogs out the wintertime when there's snow, and the need to clean the kennels. And so I was wondering if that was built in, if there was something in this current design built in to accommodate, our cold, snowy winters and the fact that they have to hose down these kennels. And so is there a warm or covered area in which dogs are taken out in the wintertime, and that space is allowed to be washed and dried in the kennels?
While there isn't specifically a warm or covered space, we did do a couple of things with respect to that. One was looking at how the roof could overhang those sidewalks to allow them to get out a little bit easier. because yes, we do all know that ice and snow is coming sooner than we all want it to. And when we designed this, note that when Zach explained the number of pets, it was up to 60 dogs, up to 90 cats. There are options to double them up in the kennels. So you have a kennel that's, thinking off the top of my head, I think it's 6 feet by 12 feet, so total in length, with a guillotine door in the center. So it allows, in a perfect condition, when you don't have a large number of animals, one animal to have both sides and have an enormous amount of space. But when you have inclement weather or you are pressed for space, you do have the ability to place animals on both sides of that. So it gives you some additional options, and it gives staff additional options. And then it becomes a management function of how do you manage what you have at the time. And what we heard from the shelter is they tend to have less animals in the winter months.
Thank you. That was what I was hoping was part of the design, was some sort of awning or overhang as you described it. That's all I had. I didn't really want to add another item to the design that might make this more expensive.
Thank you, Councilwoman Roach.
This is Councilmember Maloney.
Yes, Councilmember Maloney.
I'm all aboard. Everyone out there that's listening to this, I'm sure there's people who are interested in this. Please call Richland City Council and get them on board. I'll certainly try to do my part as well. I think it's clear that I think we as Pasco are well on our way. I know Richland wants to be very careful with their money, so we all do. But this is a well vetted, well understood project, and it's time. So I'm ready to move forward. I hope everyone else is as well. So let's just get everyone on board and move forward so we can get the facility that this community needs. Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Yeah, this is also Councilman Milne, and I just also want to reiterate Craig Maloney said it perfectly, but I do want to hope that we can get this moving as forward as soon as possible, because I know time is ticking, and I love animals, and I would just love to see this done again within the 2 years, and I just hate this thing being stretched out as long as it has. So let's see what we can do to get this done, please.
Thank you, Councilmember Milne. Yeah, I visited the area, and I think for those who are wondering, I would encourage you to go take a tour of the facility and see the importance of this. So I would say move forward, and we can move on to the next agenda item. All right, well, thank you for that. Next on the agenda item, we'll go to a item D, introduce ordinance parking code updates under section 10.65.030 of the Pasco Municipal Code. Chief Roski, are you on the line? Or is Chief Roski, anybody sitting in for Chief?
Yeah, am I unmuted here?
There you go. I can hear you now.
All right. Thank you, Mayor, council members. The parking ordinance was brought to you prior to the restrictions that we saw with COVID. So we saw a little bit of delay, but that gave us an opportunity to work with the city attorney as we redeveloped this new ordinance, proposed ordinance for some discussion. And just quickly, some highlights on this new ordinance and report that's in front of you. Takes our abandoned and our unauthorized vehicles and breaks them into 3 categories for us. Abandoned vehicle, automobile hulks, and then unauthorized vehicles. And the unique opportunity for us to take abandoned vehicles, pull that out from some of the other, or from the unauthorized vehicle, which got a little convoluted, if you'll remember back in February, I believe, when this first came to you for a rewrite, is it allows the officers to quickly, within a few days, tag a vehicle that is a eyesore in our communities and creates quality of life in our neighborhoods, and gives the officer the opportunity to get those out of there. Those eyesore vehicles that are abandoned, Hulk vehicles that are left on the street, and we clean up the neighborhoods. And then we identify what's known as an unauthorized vehicle. And these are just vehicles that people maybe are using city streets to store them because they don't want to put them on their property or put them in a storage facility, and so they're leaving them there. And this is a little more delicate and requires more time. Make sure we try and address those people that might be on, I think some of the concerns came up, somebody could be on vacation for a week or so and find themselves in that unauthorized vehicle category. This stretches that out into the 14 days before an officer can even tag it for the 3-day removal. So the pros and the cons, the benefits for the officer are listed in the agenda report. It's getting late in the evening, and so I'm just going to open this up for questions and certainly see if the city attorney, who might have some additional comments on this.
Thank you, Chief Roski. Any questions on this, Council?
It's Councilmember Maloney. I'd had some concerns the last time around. This seems to have addressed all those, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Maloney. I agree. I agree with that. There's been a situation where some people try to take advantage of the current policy, and I think this one would really help in eliminating the amount of time. And I just think that if there's going to be some habitual abusers, that this is going to be effective. You know, for those who might get caught, just one-time thing, then maybe we can work with that. But I think this is a big improvement to where it was. So thank you for putting this together, Chief Roski.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Then we'll look forward to seeing this on the next meeting for approval or denial. All right, thank you for that. And I know it's getting late, so we're going to move right along. Unless the council, do you want to just keep plugging away, or do you want to take a break?
Keep plugging.
All right, let's go.
Let's keep going one in a row.
Okay, so let's move right along to the financial. Excuse me. Go ahead. All right, then we'll move right along with financial update. Director Richa, are you on the line?
I am. Can you hear me, Mr. Mayor?
I can hear you now.
Okay, great. So evening, Mr. Mayor and Council. What is in front of you is a financial update. You must be getting kind of tired of it by now, but we've been talking about budgets quite a bit, and you also see the general fund report, which is the city's major report and one of the most important ones alongside utilities and ambulance. We try to come to you at least 3-4 times a year and give you an update on some of the other major funds as well. Those are usually determined in terms of activity and just the fund balances within the fund. But also this report, we usually try to include any funds that have any deviations, or we're expecting any deviations or variations from the approved budget. With that, if you could advance the slides. As usual, COVID this year is the highlight, and especially when it comes to finance, it's definitely an area that we are concerned about. Thankfully, we have good news to share that we've discussed in the past as well, which is that the impact to the sales tax, which is one of the major revenue for the city and for the general fund, is actually holding up really well. So that's definitely a difference in when I last presented the financial update to now. We are anticipating that we are going to, at this rate, going to meet the projected budgeted sales tax revenue. However, there are other areas where we are going to be losing some revenue, and those are mostly concentrated in areas related to tourism. So you will see a reduction in tourism, the TPA taxes, in hotel motel taxes, and also motor vehicle fuel taxes as well. Some of the tourism tax, there is hope that maybe after a certain amount of time when people have been cooped up, maybe after vaccine in 2021, 2022, there might be a lot higher activity. However, there are things with, there's only so much recoupment that you can do over a certain period, but also with motor vehicle fuel taxes as well, that there was a huge drop in the second quarter of this year that is very likely a revenue that we're not going to be able to recoup. So those are some of the things that you'll see through the slides. Also some of the grants that we have received, which is mainly CDBG grants and the local CARES grants. And then of course the expenses, just our regular expenses, operating expenses, capital projects that are ongoing or were budgeted, but also expenses that were not budgeted that are related to COVID and also new federal mandates, maybe not so new anymore, but mandates of 2 weeks of sick leave on top of what a city employee might receive, that will not be reimbursed to any of the local governments. So that is an additional expense that we are incurring right now. And depending on Congress's action, it is supposed to expire at the end of this year. But if it does get extended, then that is something that the city will have to incur as an additional expense that has not been budgeted. And then a separate category of cost, which is quite significant, is the reallocated labor. And when I say that, it's essentially the fact that, I'll just give myself as an example, I have been budgeted as a full-time employee for the whole year. So all of my salaries and benefits have been budgeted. However, what I meant to work in 2020 and what I was budgeted to work for have definitely not come to fruition in many different areas. And much of my time has gone to working on COVID-related tasks and analysis and research with new laws, even the utility assistance programs, things like that, that we had not really anticipated when we started the year or we budgeted for the year. So those are the types of labor that I mentioned as reallocated labor. You will not see them as an impact as a expense that is above budget, but it is definitely an impact to your operations. So I would like to just highlight that and make that clear. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, our sales tax is doing very well. Just to get you familiar, almost 40% of our sales tax comes from machinery and vehicle equipment sales and services. So that's a large percentage. And then about 18% comes from construction-related businesses. And by that virtue, we also are seeing, and we're lucky, we're seeing higher than normal construction and vehicle sales activity and large activity in RV sales. So we're seeing that since the pandemic. So that is one of the reasons why we will be doing okay with our sales taxes. At this point, we are hoping sales tax is something that really is very sensitive to consumer confidence. So it's a harder thing to predict in an environment right now where a lot of things are unpredictable. So we're hoping for good 2021 and 22, especially given that our area seems to be knock on wood, pretty insular to some of the national factors. We are just the right size of community where people might want to move. So construction construction activity might be ongoing for the next couple of years. And we're seeing that trend with our building permits and some of our commercial permits as well. And then of course, the vehicle sales